Hi everybody, hello and welcome. I hope you guys are doing very well today. It is so hot today. I guess it makes sense because it's July here, but wow, it's hot. I wanted to show you a really beautiful plant. If you're into perennials, reliable perennials that come back year after year, that grow very well in shade, that have huge leaves and beautiful undulating margins and flowers, I got the plant for you, and that's Bergenia. So this is a Bergenia. Some people would pronounce it as Bergenia. It's a hardy perennial plant, very adaptable, beautiful glossy leaves. This particular variety is a hybrid called Ripple Effect because of these beautiful undulating margins. Some people know of these guys as Pigsqueeks. The reason why some people call them Pigsqueeks is because when the new growth is tender, if you rub your, and it's more specific to certain varieties, but if you rub your fingers on them, they emit this pig squeak type sound. It's actually really quite cool. Being a relatively ubiquitous plant in several areas of the world, it does have other names too. Some people will call them elephant-eared saxifrage, which takes me to my next point, and that's that this is a saxifrage. It's in the family Saxifrageaceae. So a lot of different kinds are native to central parts of Asia. I think areas such as Afghanistan, China, kind of in the steppes. That's kind of where this is native to. There are, I believe, 10 representative species in the Bergenia genus. Most of the ones that you'll find in stores are either crassifolia or cordifolia. Cordifolia tends to have more of a scoop-shaped leaf. Crassifolia, just from what I've seen, tends to be a little bit bigger, a little more showy. So here in the northern hemisphere, these guys typically bloom in May, a little bit earlier for some varieties in late April, and a little bit later getting into June for some other varieties. The ripple effect one is particularly large. You can get smaller ones, bigger ones. There's typically a Bergenia for any interest. They're really beautiful, versatile plants. So Bergenias do flower in warmer shades of pink, off purple, mauve, and white. Most varieties out there have a light baby pink cymus flower. So it's kind of like a little spike, for lack of a better word, cyme, a determinate cyme that typically has around 15 or so flowers. And the flowers do persist on the plant for quite some time. They have a really nice rosy blush on the new growth that's kind of indicative of cordifolias and different kinds of Bergenias. I think they remind me a little bit of rhubarb. And this looks tender, but this is really quite tough. They grow from basal rosettes. I don't know if you can see there's 3 here. And you can totally divide these guys. You can divide them either with a little bit of the rhizome that they produce and roots, or without roots, as long as you have a sheath here and some low, you can even top cut it, and as long as you have low areas where mature leaves sprout from, you can actually remove the bottom leaves and start a new pup or plant that way. Or you can get the entire clump and just cut it in half with like a knife or a spade tip, and you can spread them all throughout the garden. They're not the heaviest feeding plants. They do well in poor soils. This one from the nursery does have a pearlized nitrogen slow release fertilizer, but they're not heavy feeders by any means. They do appreciate relatively good drainage. They're not going to want to sit in water. But with that said, they're very versatile plants. Don't worry if your Bergenia has a little bit of red on the leaves, on the upper sides of the leaves, and a little tinge of golden yellow. This happens because of temperature changes, especially in the late fall and early winter. They might go a little red, and sun stress. So Bergenia will grow pretty well in full sun, but it's definitely more of a shade plant. It's related to Bergeria, which is similar to Ligularia if you're familiar, which is totally a shade plant. But this here is really good for getting size in areas where you might not find too many things that have this kind of size. I always recommend these to people who really love hostas but want a little bit of a change in form from the classic hostas. This is kind of a nice textural contrast. So here in the northern hemisphere, if you have northern or western exposure, that's probably the best, or eastern exposure. I wouldn't really recommend southern exposure, just because 6+ hours of direct sun every day is a little bit much for these guys. And exceptionally cold hardy. I believe it's hardy to USDA zone 5. You're looking at, like, this can survive -30. Like, it's really cold hardy. They do resent the heat. So if you happen to be in a southern zone, say for example you're trying to grow this in a less temperate area like inland California, for example, you're going to want to plant them a little bit deeper, mulch them, and keep them really, really well watered. So if you're familiar with Chinese medicine, you'll know that the Chinese have been fantastic through the different dynasties in figuring out medicinal uses for plants. And they used to use this to treat asthma. They used to boil the leaves, use a medical tincture, or like a medical tea with the leaves, and apparently that was good for the respiratory system. Back in old China, they used to use this as a coagulant to stop bleeding in wounds, just rubbing parts of the plant on wounds. However, I will say a lot of modern hybrid varieties, just as a disclaimer, I'm not sure if they retain those qualities. It's something that you would want to do a little bit of further research with. Bergenia is a really, it's a hardy plant, but it's also pretty tolerant of different pest pressures. Sometimes you'll get jewel aphids, different kinds of aphids and whitefly, especially near the new growth, but they don't tend to do very much cosmetic damage. Sometimes people will get slug and gastropod damage from stuff like snails. Just picking them off at night, like going outside at night with a flashlight and picking them off, should be fine because it has a thick waxy cuticle, so they're not going to decimate your entire plant overnight. You can also use like a beer trap or similar to lure the slugs or snails if that's an issue for you. This is rabbit proof, it's rodent proof, it's relatively deer proof. I will say if the deer are super hungry, they might go after your Bergenia, so just something to be mindful of. They do well in containers, but they would prefer to be in ground because they are somewhat rhizomatous, meaning that they kind of spread with a just below the surface rhizome. But they're really, really beautiful plants. You can't go wrong with Bergenia. If you don't know about Bergenia, I would highly recommend doing your research on it and trying to incorporate it in the garden. It's really, really a beautiful plant. Another thing to note, this is an evergreen in milder winters. It'll die back to a rosette just below the soil surface in really intense winters, but this plant is really hard to kill. It's most likely going to come back for you reliably. You can expect at least a good 15 years of these guys. They do grow in clumps, colonies. In either the mid-spring or the early fall is the best time to divide them. After you divide, I'd recommend giving them a slow-release fertilizer, although once again, they do tolerate poor soils. And you're going to want to divide them for best results and best blooming once every 3 years or so. Different kinds of Bergenia that I would recommend. Of course, Bressingham White is a classic. It's a little bit of a smaller leaf, but it's a beautiful, beautiful shade of kind of creamy white flower. A Winter Glow is a really good one. Bach is a really good one because there's a variegated pink and white flower. And Angel's Kiss is a good one. And this guy, Ripple Effect, is my favorite. It's the biggest leaf that I can find. So that over there is my little introduction to Bergenia. So just to recap, prefers shade, very versatile, very cold hardy, resents the heat, definitely not, a heat-loving plant. It blooms typically April, May here in the northern hemisphere, sometimes into June. The blooms persist for about 3 weeks to 5 weeks, and well-draining soil, doesn't like sitting in water. It is somewhat succulent, not really a whole lot to speak of as far as pest pressures go, native of Central Asia. The leaves can get even bigger than this in some varieties. Most of the flowers are either pink or white, not a heavy feeding plant. So that's my little introduction to Bergenia, and you gotta grow this, you just gotta.